You got to give it to Sudan and its other Saharan states, be it Mali, Chad, Mauritania, or Somalia. They somehow managed to embody the worst aspects of both African and Arab culture. They combine the brutal, organized efficiency of ISIS, Al Qaeda, and those various groups with the mass political violence, rape, cannibalism, ethnic cleansing, and all the other kind of shenanigans people get up to down in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're going to throw in some Arab supremacism and Islamism into the mix. And you get a very pleasant cocktail, which helps explain why when someone asked me to cover the Sudan Civil War, I said, which civil war? And they said, the current civil war. And I said, which current civil war? Because there's a couple we could pick from. To which they said, the one that involves the Rapid Support Forces. I said, oh, that civil war. You got to be a little bit more clear about it whenever we're talking about Sudan. So I could go back a long way about Sudan, how it was, I think, part of the British protectorate of Egypt. Its status has kind of been ambiguous over time. It was the Mahadist state run by the dervishes, and then it was kind of part of Egypt, and then you had the Republic of Sudan, and now you have the Republic of Sudan and South Sudan. So a bit of recent history. Sudan went through a series of military dictatorships and various other dramatic changes in governments after the British withdrew from the country. There was a time period where it had a Nasserist government. There was various Arab socialist and pan-Arab countries, forces in power. Sudan, from my understanding, has historically been one of the most radically pan-Arabist states. Now, it's important to keep in mind when you're talking about Sudanese Arabs, a lot of people will look at them and just say, they look black. They don't really look like the kind of Arabs you see from the Arabian Peninsula or Syria. It's important to keep in mind that Arab does have an ethnic connotation to it, but it's kind of also a religious and cultural group and a linguistic group, almost more so than being a particular racial group. It's a bit like with Hispanics, I think is the closest comparison you could draw, wherein you have like black Hispanics, white Hispanics, mestizo Hispanics, mulatto Hispanics of all different kinds. And it's somewhat similar to that in terms of Arabs in different parts of particularly the Sahara. You have people in Morocco who are Berbers, and you have people in Syria who are Levantines, and you have people in Saudi Arabia who are Bedouins, but they all identify as Arab. And it should also be kept in mind that there is some genetic truth to a lot of this. It's not purely just a bunch of Africans pretending they're from the Middle East. As with Spain, a lot of the people who identify as Sudanese Arab have the Y chromosome from a Middle Eastern ancestor. So what probably happened is what often happens is a bunch of Arab males invaded Sudan, kind of took it over and formed harems and just kind of bred with mass numbers of women. So even though their original Arabian blood has been diluted over time, the dominant male paternal groups have, generally speaking, been Arab. And so the culture of, I was looking at statistics, it's probably about, they say 70% Sudanese Arab, but then there's a bunch of like minorities that are Arabized Africans. So the northern Sudan is probably about 75 to 80% Arab. It used to be, I think, about half or slightly less than half when southern Sudan was still part of the country. So we're kind of getting off of topic here. Let's get back on to our main story. So for the time period for 20 years between 1989 to 2019, Sudan was ruled by Omar al-Bashir, who was an Islamist and an Arab supremacist. He founded the National Congress Party, which was banned because Sudan was transitioning to be a democracy, and part of being a democracy is banning all opposition parties, which was a Islamist, anti-Zionist, Sudanese Arab nationalist party that was affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. So he took power in a coup. However, my understanding is it more or less transferred back to being some form of civilian government. And he attempted to control the country for the next 20 years or so, trying to Islamize it and Arabize various portions of the country. Now, the issue is South Sudan, or what we now call the Republic of South Sudan, um, is only like, I think, 6% Muslim and six or less than that Arab. And it's overwhelmingly Christian and pagan. I think it's like 60% Christian, 40% pagan. It might be the highest pagan state in the world. It's probably even higher than someplace like Papua. But there was a long-standing civil war between the two sides, wherein northern Sudan was continuing to try to impose its will on the south. You also have Darfur, which you may have heard about in the west, which once again I think is less Arabized than the rest of the country. And you had an ongoing conflict wherein various militias and military groups were attempting to force these areas into compliance, ethnically cleanse them, and Arabize them. So, to go about this, in addition to the Sudanese armed forces, you had the Janjaweed, who were, I think, largely drawn from uh, Arabian camel herders, so like nomadic peoples, various Arab nomadic peoples, but also just some, I think, some Arabized Africans. And they would just basically roam the countryside of Darfur in southern Sudan and just kind of massacre villages of African Sudanese, drive them off of their land. My understanding is that because they were a paramilitary group who was outside of the normal military command structure, they were directly loyal to the president, and he could give them orders and do things without the military high command's approval. Now, I could be completely wrong about this, but that's my understanding is they were a special paramilitary force created because they weren't subject to any of the same restrictions and regulations and oversight such as it was of the Sudanese armed forces. They were a political group who was ideologically dependable and was directly responsible to the president, ironically enough. Now, out of the Janjaweed eventually became the Rapid Support Forces. And the second I heard the term Rapid Support Forces, I was like, where have I heard this name before? And like, oh, Rapid Response Group Batman. That like pro-Russian militia in the Donbass that was literally the Batman group. And like they should change their name from like Rapid Support Forces to Rapid Support Forces Group Batman. It does sound like something from Team America World Police. I think actually on like that Afghan public affairs page, they call their like international group the Rapid Response Force or something like that, the one they said they were going to send to Romania to free Andrew Tate, and the mainstream media believed it. But I digress. So the Janjaweed and all the other various militia groups who were operating in these areas were merged together in 2013 to form the Rapid Support Forces, which were kind of a separate group within the Sudanese army. I'm not sure how exactly you want to classify them as. Are they like a political army like the SS or the Praetorian Guard? Are they like a more of almost of an intelligence or internal security service whose job is to maintain law and order and impose the government's will? Are they just there for doing stuff that the normal army doesn't want to get involved with? I don't really know, but they've grown over time to be about 100,000 in size, to the point where they're large enough to challenge the mainstream Sudanese military. Now, what's interesting is we come to 2019. So there is a series of riots that lead to the army carrying out a coup against Bashir. Interestingly, the Rapid Support Forces almost immediately snake on him, and I think they're the ones who managed to capture Bashir and turn him over to the military government. Now, the head of the Rapid Support Forces, this dude, who was also the head of the Janjaweed, became deputy chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, which was the junta that replaced the government of Omar al-Bashir. Now, when the military came to power, they said there was going to be this transition to democracy. Oh, sorry, maybe just step back a bit. So, why was Bashir overthrown? I haven't found an exact answer for it. I mean, this is Africa, and the fact that he was even able to remain in power for like 20 years is saying something. The official explanation is that there was, the normal stuff, extreme amounts of corruption, food prices were going through the roof, um, chronic unemployment, lack of health care and basic services, militia groups running around the countryside, stealing people's property, committing massacres, raping people, constant civil wars with no end. I mean, you can pick one. It's without even getting into any kind of like conspiracy theories, because maybe it was a colored revolution. I'm not really sure. It's not as if the Sudanese people didn't have a reason to hate the Bashir government, just as any African people outside of Botswana have a reason to hate their government. I'll have to do a video. If I get enough research done, I'll do a video about Botswana at some point. So it's like the only decently managed country in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a very interesting case, but I digress. So they joined. So Bashir was overthrown in a series of mass riots, culminating in a military coup. Once again, was it a colored revolution? Bashir was an anti-Zionist, so he was definitely an enemy of the United States. He was a pan-Arabist, and he was pro-China, North Korea, Pakistan, and various other Eastern countries. So he was definitely an opponent of the Americans, but I don't know. The only reason anyone really cares about Sudan is because Sudan is a major producer of oil. And so even though the country is a poor wreck, it still has some strategic and economic value. Anyways, so Bashir was overthrown in a military coup. There was a civilian military joint government that was supposed to transition into being a purely civilian government. However, in 2021, we had another coup in which the army, in cooperation with the Rapid Support Forces, overthrew the hybrid government and put it back to being a pure junta. There was another attempt at a transition to democracy after the detransition from democracy, but that didn't happen, and then the fighting broke out. So what was the deal with these coups and the transition to democracy and all that kind of thing? So the issue that military regimes face a lot of the time, and this is true for most dictatorships, is we have this like post-World War II idea that we have to hold governments accountable for every law that they violate, even if the laws aren't accepted within the country itself. Even if they haven't signed on to the International Criminal Court or any of these groups, we still have to abide by their rulings. Like Bashir was indicted by the International Criminal Court, and like a lot of people are using this as a reason that he had to get taken down. But as I've said in other videos, the U.S., India, China, Russia, Sudan, none of these countries recognize the International Criminal Court. You have some random dudes in like The Hague who issue an arrest warrant for a guy from a country that doesn't acknowledge your court's rulings. And how does that help in any way to have a peace process? If you're basically saying, look, the leader of this country is a criminal, and if he ever steps down and loses his monopoly on the use of violence, he's going to be arrested and spend the rest of his life in jail. And this is the issue where they insist that everyone is legally responsible for everything and there's no head of state protections and there's no amnesty for the military or anything. I mean, if you were a general and you're head of a junta and you know that if you step down, the civilian government is immediately going to arrest you for treason and execute you or make you spend the rest of your life in jail, and they will go through and ruin your family. What are you going to do? Are you going to take your chances trying to maintain control of the country by force? Or are you going to step down quietly and try to just you're so committed to democracy, you're just going to go ahead with it. And in most cases, they just don't want to. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons why whenever they're about to transition to democracy, the military pulls back on it. Because they're like, look, we know if we detransition, if we stop taking the if we keep taking the democracy hormones and stop taking the military hormones, then the detransition is going to result in us dying or being crippled for life. And so I think that's what happened with the Riku. So then there's the question of why did the current conflict break out? So what is the current conflict known as the 2023 Sudanese clashes? So this broke out 4 days ago between the Sudanese army and the Rapid Support Forces. Now, the actual cause of this, I'm not entirely sure. We'll get into like the conspiracy theories in a minute, but there was supposed to be another transition to democracy that was scheduled, I think, roughly for about the same time. I'm not sure if it was a couple days before or a couple days after the actual coup broke out, or the uprising by the Rapid Support Forces against the government of Sudan, or rather the military of Sudan. So that is something I think to keep in mind is there was a ticking clock, and it may very well just be something as simple as they carried out this fight because they were afraid because they're made up of Janjaweed militias, and the vast majority of them are probably guilty of war crimes, that they were all going to go to jail or get executed or get extradited if there was a successful transition to a civilian government. So that's theory number one. I think that's fairly... I don't think that that's a crazy theory, but that's possible. The second one is the military has been pressuring the Rapid Support Forces to fold into the normal Sudanese army, to stop being a semi-independent, separate group with its own command structure, to basically disarm them, employ all their members as regular army soldiers, and see the strength of them as a political unit drain away. And that I think they just viewed as being unacceptable because they were the power behind the throne. Their leader was the deputy ruler of the country. He was so important the military had to give them a place at a table. The army had to throw all kinds of gold and oil and money and stuff their way. So did they really want to give that up? Like, if it transitions to civilian rule, they get folded into the regular Sudanese army. A bunch of people start going to jail. Like, is that really where they want to go? So they very well might have just said, fuck it, we're just going to roll the dice on this one. Maybe we can win this war. We can keep the junta going, but under our leadership, and we can eliminate a possible threat to us. We're screwed anyway, so we might as well try to fight it out. And who knows, maybe it'll work out, or we'll get another 20-year-long civil war. So that is my opinion of what I think happened, is that there is not a broader ideological or political or geopolitical conflict here. I think it's literally just a completely dysfunctional country that has faced like half a century of ethnic, political, cultural warfare, having the latest phase of that, in which one group doesn't want its power and influence and money taken away by another, so they choose to take it to the streets and fight for it. I really don't think it's that much more complicated than that. Now, people have tried to say that the Rapid Support Forces are a Russian proxy, and that Wagner, that the conductor of Wagner came down and taught the Rapid Support Forces how to play, I don't know, Russian ballet or something, but I don't know. So the conspiracy theory I've heard is that Russia wants to build a military base, or rather a naval base, on the coast of Sudan. And they had come to a deal with the hybrid government and then a deal with the military government to build this base. And the U.S. didn't like it, so the U.S. backed the Rapid Support Forces in an uprising to try to overthrow the military government, with the understanding that if they supported them, then they would cancel the Russian military base. Now, this just seems a bit of kind of over the top for me. There's no clear ideological distinction I can see. I get that the Rapid Support Forces grew out of the Janjaweed, and so should be more, you'd think would be more Arab supremacist and Islamist. And I guess the U.S. has like a history of backing those groups, even when it's against their own interests. But I don't know. They don't seem particularly pro-U.S. The Sudanese government is probably somewhat pro-Russia because Russia will actually do business with them. That's kind of the problem. If you make everybody your enemy, then all you'll have is enemies. And the U.S. has just shit on all of these countries for decades now. So obviously none of them like them. So do I think that this is some like 4D chess plan? I think it's like I don't know. It sounds like a Noam Chomsky thing to me. Because like Noam Chomsky's like theory of history is that the U.S. does everything. There was no native communist movement. There was no monarchist movements. Basically, non-white people are incapable of having political ideology or rational self-reflection, and absolutely everything that's happened to them is solely the result of American or other Western intervention. So, has the Russians and the Chinese and the U.S. been in talks with both sides? Yeah, they have everybody has an interest in Sudan because it's an oil-producing country. It's on the Red Sea, and Russia wants a military base there. So obviously, America and Russia and China and whoever else, Egypt and Ethiopia, are going to be involved. They're going to be talking to the different sides, trying to figure out who they can do business with, trying to figure out who's going to give them the best deal. Does Russia maybe support one side more than another? Yeah, but I haven't seen any evidence that this is like the anything close to like what we saw with the Syrian civil war or the Yemeni civil war or the Iraqi civil war or any of the other sides where you clearly had a pro-U.S. and then a pro-Saudi Arabia, pro-Iranian side. So that's my opinion. If you think I'm being naive and that this is like a big U.S. psyop and that the Rapid Support Forces are like an arm of the CIA or something, feel free to post it below. Like I said, I'm not an expert on this issue, but that's just what I think, is that it's simply a military group that didn't want to lose its preferential status and was afraid of facing prosecution for things it done in the past. Anyways, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed it. God bless everybody, and more great content to come.